Thanks, Abir, and thanks to all the presenters who gave us insights in such wonderful pilot projects. I'm sure everyone agrees that there's such a wealth of material to reflect on, to inspire us, and also to discuss, which nicely leads to the next part of this morning session, the panel discussion. So we can already see that some questions were submitted through the Q&A Zoom function by our attendees. Please feel free to post more questions if they come up in the discussion, and the panel will try and address them all. And the job of doing that is Elena Silvestrini of Platoniq, one of our CultureLabs partner, who will moderate the discussion and collate the questions with the panelists and presenters. Elena?
Hi, thank you, Louis. Thanks, everyone. And it's amazing to hear all the stories in details, and I'm looking forward to digging into more of that with you. We already have some questions in the Q&A, so I will start addressing speakers on a first come first serve basis, but I'm sure we can have a conversation, not just Q&A. So I will be starting from the first question, which is from Alda Terracciano. The address is Francesca from COS. And the question is, if you could please further discuss the balance across various bodies delivering the project. So I understand the question, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, please, Alda, but the question is about the different type of bodies, so NGOs working with migrants and cultural institutions that collaborate in the cultural project, and how this balance have worked. Thank you, Alda, for confirming. So how this maybe has influenced and how the balance has worked. So thank you, Francesca.
Yes, it is exactly the part that I didn't present because it was in step 1, but it is very important because the pilot started with a strong collaboration with different local bodies and stakeholders. First of all, the municipality, that was very, very supportive, and it was the Department of Social Services, but then also the Department of Culture. And then we had a stronger collaboration with the Adult Education Center because a lot of migrants attend these courses, and the teacher, Italian language teacher, was very, very collaborative, and she took part to all the laboratories we did in this period. Also in the recruitment time, in the reaching out migrants, we also started collaboration with the church, with other associations in the neighborhood. So we recruited a great number of participants. But the collaboration didn't end after step 1 because I didn't tell you, but during all the duration of the pilot, we had a monthly meeting where all the representatives of these bodies were present, and we discussed how to go on if something was wrong. And also we had the collaboration with the University of Bologna, because Luca, that is our educator, is also making a PhD in cultural education, let's say. And this professor from the University of Bologna is his supervisor. And he agreed to participate to this monitoring, to these internal meetings, because he wanted to give suggestions and to monitor what Luca was doing, how to solve different solutions, situation, and so on. So what Luca did with the group during the labs were anyway monitored and discussed with many other stakeholders that had been involved. I don't know if I answered your questions, but another important thing is step 4, because we wanted to restitute the CultureLabs, the pilot activities to the community, but unfortunately the COVID didn't allow us. We will have a small event at the end of this month to represent this. And, but our initial ideas were to create a murales that the municipality would have done from the output of the pilot. I don't know if we will be able to do it after the project ends. I hope so, because the video is nice and there are possible pictures for this, but the initial plans were to create something for the community and to paint a wall of the school in the neighborhood from the output of this project.
Thank you, Francesca. That leads me to actually asking a connected question, maybe to Abir, since she coordinated the pilot side of the project, so she might she has a view, you know, on the different experiences. Could you tell us a bit, if you have any thoughts on how different has been, you know, to organize the pilots from a perspective of a cultural institution, or from, you know, Francesca's example of NGO working with migrants, and of course the different pilots have worked with different communities, you know, more recent migrants or second generation, or communities like Manchester, you know, that has managed to attract a different, you know, a very diverse audience. So if you could touch on, yeah, some of these points.
So so if I understood correctly, we're talking about the collaboration between institutions, and that is indeed happened differently between each of the pilots, and we discovered the differences along like while we're progressing. So the main differences, in my opinion, are obviously we're all different institutions, even though that People's History Museum and Museo Foresto Finnish Heritage Agency are coming from a culture heritage perspective. We are still quite different because for the Finnish Heritage Agency, it's also the main agency that looks after the museums in Finland, and it's based in the capital city, while we are an independent museum. So it's also different in terms of the power dynamics, if you want, or how you're perceived within the society. But the other difference as well is where you're starting from. So I was always interested in FST's experience, because they were more like the middle person trying to connect the cultural actors with the community actors. And I think that was a very good, I mean, having this diversity in approaches in CultureLabs was very good, because we learned a lot from different perspectives, and similarly to COS, because they are working with the communities on regular basis, and they had to reach out to cultural institutions through the public administrations as well, to create that project. While for us, for example, as a museum, we had our own space, we had our program, our collection, and we made this decision as well to, we did a lot of collaborations, obviously, but that was very much limited to the conception phase, because once we decided that we really want to work with a diverse group of individuals, we recognized that we can't really work with one group only. So we had to move on to taking that responsibility, which isn't very easy, to be honest, because that meant we don't have someone who is connecting us with the group, and we had to do it ourselves, which takes a lot of time. The last thing before I think I could have answered your question is that also not everyone has allocated enough resources to support cultural mediators, which is why we think it's a very good recommendation to do. Some of us had to change plans so they can have enough resources to actually pay people to support with that, even though they were collaborating with other organizations. But this actual organization work takes a lot of time, so we can't really assume that people will do it for free, especially that it's on they are usually community organizations with very stretched resources. So there's a lot of dynamics in that, but I think that was very useful to gain the wider perspective and make some generalizations, because obviously we can't generalize everything. I hope I answered the question. Yeah,
thank you. That's definitely very interesting and relevant point about scarcity of resources and not expecting people to do work for free. So that's a very relevant point. I would like to address some of the following questions. That is from Catherine Alton. Maybe FST could be answering this question. So the question is, before the start of the projects, are there examples, it's from any of the 4 case studies, so of course after any other pilot leader could answer, but are there any examples of project participants informing the development development and planning of the project themselves. So the actual involvement of communities and participants, not just, you know, as a feedback or at the end of the project, but also in the framing of it.
Yes, we don't have any example, actual example, but what we did at the beginning of the project was indeed to organize a lot of meetings with the participants, during which we had the opportunity to design with them the pilot, the different steps we would like to take during the pilot. For example, we asked participants what museum they prefer to visit during the pilot, what kind of activity they prefer to do during the pilot. So what we did is organize a lot of meetings with different with participants, but also with the stakeholders. For example, with the Association Casa della Donna, with which we had a lot of preliminary meetings with their cultural mediators. For example, they recommended us to involve participants using as a stimulus several kinds of stimulus and so on. So not practical examples, but a lot of meetings. This was the ingredient, the crucial ingredient for us. I don't know if I answered your question.
I'm not sure if anybody else from the pilot wants to answer this question, otherwise I can continue with other questions. Okay, since we mentioned many times the role of facilitators, cultural mediators, I wanted to ask Suvi from Museo Virasto, since there were communities that spoke different languages, Russian, Farsi. So I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit more about this experience in terms of the role of languages and the role of also photography being able to kind of mediate in that without necessarily being able to speak the same language. And maybe also, how did you decide what groups to work with? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, maybe I could start with the women's group example from there. So actually in the beginning in the group, we had women who spoke diversity of languages, but it was quite difficult to find a common language because some of the participants did not speak Finnish very well. And for the idea of sharing stories, being able to really express themselves, it was actually a little bit difficult in the beginning. There were like at Nice Hearts, our collaborator, they have good experience. They facilitated a lot the communication by using plain language. There were also interns from their side taking part in the workshop, so they could like help the participants with the language. Sometimes the participants would help each other. But I would say it was quite complicated in terms of also of providing equal opportunity for everybody to actually make sure that I have expressed myself, I have said everything I wanted to say and it's correctly understood. And it was actually a coincidence that due to the pandemic, our group became smaller. Some participants dropped out in the process. And in the end, we had most of our participants were from the same country, Afghanistan. So that enabled us to engage one mediator who spoke same language. But it is difficult. We didn't really solve this problem or challenge of how to actually work with the multiple languages in a group. But we did make a decision that, okay, we want to provide this opportunity to for like either in Russian or in Dari Farsi. So when we could do it, we wanted to really have like give this opportunity for everybody to be fully involved language-wise. Yes.
Thank you, Suvi. I'll keep reading from the Q&A section, so keep them coming if you have more questions. There are 3 comments/questions for Abir, so I'm not sure if you prefer I read all of them or one by one, yeah, I will start with the first one. It's from Joe. So, and Joe says, hi Abir, I thought the animation was great, and I wanted to ask you whether any discussions came up at PHM, so at the museum, about the recent by-election at Bartley at Spen, which Joe Cox once represented, and how it became quite a toxic political moment. At the National Library of Scotland, where I research, we sometimes struggle with the boundary between politics and culture, even though the two are often indistinguishable. Any advice on how to frame this better? So the boundary between research, between politics and culture.
Yeah, so just a quick comment on the by-elections question, and then I'll move on to the main question. Actually, the by-elections were announced when we were just opening the exhibition, probably 1 week before the exhibition, because the MP won the mayoral elections, and there was by-elections, which indeed turned into a very toxic environment. But just having said that, we didn't have really the time frame of our conversations and sessions was not at the same time when this happened, which is this month. So we didn't actually touch on that, just probably because of the time issue. In terms of boundaries between culture and politics, that is indeed a very a tricky thing that is always brought up. Obviously, we are, the whole museum, the People's History Museum, is about the process of democracy. So some people would interpret that as politics. I personally would say there is nothing that isn't politics in our lives. So the best framework I found to classify where things would become really political rather than everyday life issues is when we start talking about like power and specific parties, like very official political processes. However, everything else, I would say, shouldn't be confined in terms of expression, because I personally see every sort of expression as a political expression as well. And at the museum, we all explore like very, let's say, difficult conversations and topics that affect social justice and or concern social justice and affect everyone's lives. So we're not afraid really of making those conversations, and we think that it's our role as a museum to present what's going on. But yeah, I do agree that it's sometimes a blurred line, as always with politics, but this is how I frame it. And yeah, I mean, let us know if you have figured out another way to frame it as well, and we can have a chat about this at some point.
Thank you, Abir. I will just continue with you reading the next question. So what's next? Will PHM be continuing and maintaining relationships with project participants? And just reading a comment that says that they actually cried upon listening to the Voices of Manchester project, and they wowed, and it's amazing work. So congratulations.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't mean to make people cry, but it is actually really emotional. Obviously, this is a sum up of 7 conversations that each are like more than an hour long. So we are hoping to make those available at some point. And we actually want to, that's like a crossover between the 2 questions. We are hoping to see how this project in specific can become like something to replicate in the future, hopefully in person rather than on Zoom. So what's next? In general, as a museum, because we always do this sort of participatory work, so we usually keep in touch with everyone who would like to be kept in touch. We invite people to all our events and opportunities. But for the longer term, we are currently thinking about structuring that in a way that gives participants and co-curators an official space where they can feed back regularly into our programs, not like just in ad hoc opportunities where they are invited. So that is something that we are exploring at the moment, to create like a forum of such kind. However, that's just in generally speaking about PHM. But for this group specifically, the group of participants that committed till the end, we are currently exploring with the Joe Cox Foundation how we support their sustainability as an independent group, because there is a similar, not similar, but similar sort of groups across the country that are called More in Common, and they are groups of volunteers. However, because this group started at the museum, we thought we might want to, if the group wants, obviously, to be supported by the museum, at least as a space to gather and see what they'd like to do. So that is something under discussion at the moment as well, specifically for this project. Probably the Voices of Manchester is the most intriguing starting point to talk about, because the 7 interviews we did were supposed to be a trial, and they worked. So it's good to build on that. Yeah, that's me, sorry.
Thank you, Abir. I will continue reading the questions. This one is for all pilot leaders, so if anyone would like to respond to this. Did you set expectations on how long the projects would run for at the start of the participation? And if so, how did you handle those conversations?
I think we already planified the duration of the project from the beginning when we designed the pilot.
Yeah, the time frame is probably given by the project, but then the different, of course, like the pilots, yeah, could have, yeah, kind of varied in that. Another question from Tilly from the National Football Museum is, how did the project work with a large amount of group participants, and did this affect the connection of a group members and the outcome of the project? So the question is about like how to work with big numbers of participants and how to support and hold the connection between them.
Try to give an answer. In our case, we had a big number of participants, but obviously only a number of 15, 12 were always present. But we decided since the beginning not to hinder the attendance to any newcomers or others. So we had very big groups, sometimes 20, 25 persons. But obviously, the importance of having leading figures that is able to manage big groups is, I think it is something very important in this case. And obviously, it doesn't affect the connection of group members, because once you have a core group, then they are very willing to accept others. And so if the group enlarges, there are no problems, or at least we didn't experience problems for this. And as for the outcome, unfortunately, we cannot say, because the COVID created a lot of withdrawals. So the numbers at the beginning were 35 persons, at the end were 8, 10 persons. So unfortunately, I cannot answer this question. I don't know what the outcome might have been if the group had remained of 35 persons.
I might have a small answer to that, because also we couldn't experience that, because we also had to stop and then start in smaller groups. But our initial idea was to keep meeting less frequently and more on a like less formal way within the big groups for like every 2 weeks. Not necessarily or not at all doing any, producing any creative work, but rather have that space for us, whether to go visit some places or learn something new each time. Those were the ideas we started exploring. But the real work, or not the real work, sorry, that's the wrong term to put it, but the production of any creative work would be done in smaller groups. Because obviously that would not really be meaningful in that large group, and that's not what we wanted. So I think, yeah, just having that balance between a big group and splitting in smaller groups and having that individual connection with the facilitator is the factor that makes you determine like how big of a group you have to say, no more, I'm creating a new group for this. So yeah. Splitting up.
Thank you. I'm not sure anyone else would like to answer to that. Otherwise, I carry on with another question from Solomon, which says, hello, everyone. One general question. During the pilot projects, have you experienced or seen certain difficulties with regards to integration policies or regulation? If that was the case, what would be your recommendations? Thank you. So the question is about integration policies and regulations and difficulties in relating to those.
I can say something regarding this. I have to say that we didn't experience any sort of difficulties regarding the integration policies during our pilot, but what we experienced during the lockdown was the difficulty of some people who were living in the refugee centers to join our meeting, because they indeed were avoided to leave their centers. But I don't have any particular recommendation for this, but what we did in this case is to keep these people involved, engaged during all the pandemic and the lockdown duration.
Thank you, Marzia. If anyone else would like to address the point of regulations and policies.
Yeah, I have a small incident that we faced, and I think that is something that can happen again. So some of the participants of our project were really terrified at some point before they before building that trust that we keep talking about, of being, let's say, reported, or it depends on, I can't even reveal what was the actual case, but basically having that fear of being reported to the government or whatever because of their status. So their main concern was actually from other participants. So I think the way we addressed it was more about really listening and taking these concerns into account. I mean, for us, at least as far as I'm aware, like we try to do whatever we can in terms of creating that safe space or safer space. Luckily, nothing happened, but there's always this risk that you might fail. So it is risky, like any sort of this work is risky. So taking as much, let's say, precautions. For example, the main thing that they would have been angry about is to be photographed. So we didn't actually, not only for them, but even before this was this concern was raised, probably the first 4 sessions, we didn't even take any photographs. We didn't even ask if they would give us consent or not, because we didn't want them to feel that this is a project that we need to photograph people in and just put it on social media. The whole purpose, I wouldn't even, at the first beginning of the project, I wouldn't even let like any staff to jump into the room. It would have been like certain people who they start to know. So it's not like they feel that they are exposed to anyone just opening the door and coming into the session. So it was more just creating that safe space. And obviously I don't know what would have the outcome been for this, because we had to stop. And actually some of the main reasons for those participants not to do the online sessions was also the security concern. So yeah, it's just trying to work around that and safeguard them as much as possible.
Thank you, Abir. You touched on a very interesting point. I was wondering if you or anyone else could expand on this, and what does it mean to create a safer space for this participation? Like, of course, safety is it's a loaded concept, and we can arrive to a certain extent to it, and there's not like a one single definition of what safety means. So it's negotiated between participants, and each of them has a different experience. But I was wondering if you could add anything on that, and how that should be or should not be a concern for those that organize participatory processes.
Yeah, I mean, I will leave some space for others, but just to finish my idea in terms of photography, having staff, like only the regular ones, attend at least at the beginning. When we turned, obviously we have our own safeguarding policies at the museum, so we make sure everyone is aware of that, including any facilitators. When we turned into the online sessions, we created a whole new set of guidelines for online engagement, because there was this risk of people just taking over Zoom or whatever. And also we, for example, had to have a second staff always on the call, or a freelancer, depending on, so not having only one person, although it was like really like far in the project that we actually knew everything about each other, because we were meeting regularly in smaller groups. But I think also the thing that made participants feel that they would be safer in this place is to see all these measures taken, and see some actions taken if they raised any concerns. So that was very useful. But as you said, this is what I think we mean by safer, because we can never create the optimum space. We can try our best, and also sometimes it's not good to be that protective. So just be reasonable in terms of what we are trying to do. Be more like considerate rather than patronizing, because there's also a slight like a fine line between both. And if I was a participant, I wouldn't want someone to be creating that sensation for me that I'm a vulnerable person that needs the protection. So it's just more having that equal like relationship between both. But yeah, sorry, I keep talking.
No, thank you. It's very interesting. Not sure if anyone else would like to add on this and their experiences with the pilots.
I could add something from our experience. I would say that for creating that safer space for us, it was very important to work together with our collaborator. I would even say, I'm not referring to the women's group specifically. I would say that the process would have been very different without them, because as a practical example, like the photographs from the beginning, like from the very first workshops, the reactions to them were there were a lot of emotional reactions, both very positive and both negative, but emotion was definitely present. And for us, coming from a cultural heritage institution, this type of social engagement is maybe not our strongest skill. So to have the people who had the expertise to react to these reactions and to facilitate what happens next, it was very important. I would say even like to have that practical experience and the skills, yeah, is very important. And it really created it was also a process of like people getting to know each other better. Then they knew what to expect, how to they knew that the space was safe and so on. It's yeah, can't be taken for granted, but has to be created and may take some time. But yes, for cultural heritage institutions, many times collaborator is important to have.
Yeah, of course, also the fact itself of working with the institution could be something that creates a feeling of challenging safety in there. So you definitely I hear what you say. Anyone else on this, or shall we take more questions? Okay, so next question, again from Alda, it's in light of the impact of the pandemics in project delivery, what advice would you give for those that are planning similar activities? So how to plan, taking into the consideration the pandemic. Maybe I can address that to Francesca to give her the word.
Not so easy to give suggestions in this case, because for us it was really a disaster. You know that they didn't like the virtual opportunities offered by technology, and that was the only possibility. So I don't know. It's very. I hope you won't have this need in the future, but. Probably, yes, is to start since the beginning to say there is the possibility, the opportunity to use technology as a supporter, as a facilitator of our activities, and probably to start since the beginning to plan virtual activities together with the present one, so that they can be used to it should something happen. But we were not prepared to that. And so for us, from the very in-presence and very deep, very participated meetings to go to the virtual ones was a flop. So I'm not the best one to suggest you.
I think it's also important to create a space where we can allow for difficulty. Like the pandemic has not been easy, and it's not easy currently. So I think it's important to say that, and to make feel all the experiences that it's not it's not one's fault if they're not able to cope with the pandemic in their project. The pandemic is difficult. Any other experiences with regard to projects planning and implementing and pandemic?
I mean, I think it's just terrible now to think about having to plan within the pandemic. So hopefully we won't have to. But I think the main challenge we face, although all our plans were flexible, but the challenges we face is that we had already started not taking that into consideration, because no one would have expected that. So if planning a new project, that is a bit different, because apart from, I think Alda also suggested like training participants on technology. Obviously, that is being done at the moment. I've witnessed a lot of, also in terms of providing devices and tools for people who are more have less access to technology is undergoing. So that's something good, probably that's one of the good things that happens in terms of the pandemic positive side. So apart from that, I would say the design of the project itself could change if it was planned in the mindset that people will be in lockdown. So that might be something to take people to the streets or engage with them more on a personal basis from the beginning. One of the things we found very useful during the creative process was when the artist was directly communicating with individual participants to support their creative practice. I haven't had planned for that within from the beginning, but we had to adapt, obviously. And that was very, very useful. So that is like this personal connection, whether with the facilitator or the artist working with the person, could be planned from the beginning. We did send a lot of things in the posts, obviously, because people had to produce things at home. So I was just buying in stock and going to the post distributing things. So that was one of the things that people did during the pandemic with such projects. So yeah, I mean, it's just not always everything can be adapted, as Elena said. Some things have to change completely. Hopefully we won't have to plan for hard lockdowns anymore. But if that is the case, we need to take that into consideration from the beginning. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question, especially for the cultural institutions and the museums and, you know, within the group and the pilots. So I was wondering if the CultureLabs experience working in participation changed or gave you a new experience, perspective, or opportunity to do things differently than you used to do before. So have you been reflecting on what real participation means and you know, like because there are different obviously degrees, you know, of participation or co-creation of activities organized by cultural institutions or with other groups. So has this project influenced the way you think about participation and cultural institutions? And do you have any advice to give to the audience or to other organizers with respect to participation and cultural institutions? Hope that was clear.
Well, yes, I can start. Definitely, I would say it is the maybe the main takeaway has been the fact that how should I say that the time that it takes to build this kind of genuine relationships of collaboration and also to maintain them, the sustainability aspect. That is sort of like real work and it takes a lot of time and effort from an organization. But what I would say to other organizations who are like planning to start or engage in this kind of process, I would say that it is worth it to take that time. It will like it's maybe for example, it may feel like if you're starting this kind of process that nothing is happening or how much time it will take until something comes. But being like flexible and patient with these processes, accepting the changes, it is of major importance. And I think for organizations, probably for any kind of organizations, but maybe institutions, cultural institutions that are now just starting to come into this field, it is something that is not built into the way of work, the flexibility and unpredictability and accepting all these factors. So I would say definitely yes, these are some of the learnings that we have had.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Any other views on this? I think there's a lot of experiences with regards to this.
I can add something because I'm not in a cultural institution, but you know, we collaborated with the municipality and the museum of the city of the municipality. And we realized in this collaboration that they struggle to propose participatory approaches, participatory activities, but they don't have the internal competencies. And it is obviously not a criticism, but it is the nature of cultural institutions to have experts in the cultural fields. But they really struggle, they really want to create the community through the museum, involve people in the museum, and they understood that they need the collaboration of other parties. In this case, it was us because of the CultureLabs project, but for sure they learned a lot from here, and I'm sure that they will try to continue these activities to involve people in the museum, both for the museum because they want to share on the cultural heritage, but also to make it an open space for other people to bring their own culture. So yes, I think the CultureLabs project was a first step in this process.
That's a great point, Francesca. Thank you. Any other questions? Maybe also answers. Maybe also connecting to the legacy, you know, of this project, because of course the project is ending, but the processes, you know, that each of the pilots and the partners really and have engaged with this will stay. So if you can tell me something about what you think the legacy of this will be, that would be interesting.
It's difficult to volunteer when you don't assign us questions, Elena. I'll just go back to the lessons learned. I personally come from like a more of a social engagement background, so I didn't know much about cultural institutions when I first started working with the People's History Museum for this project. So that was probably helpful for me as well, to lead on this project. And I think that is, let's say, one of the things that we can learn, probably involve people from other sectors within this sector to help it move on to other directions. I think in general, cultural institutions, at least in the UK, sorry, I can't really talk about other contexts, but there's this shifts towards like questioning what their role is as institutions in the society, and especially with all the changes and rapid changes, let's say, even before the pandemic, with the changes in societies, whether that's through migration or other reasons, and what heritage actually means, what culture actually means. So I think there's this ongoing, growing, let's say, recognition that in order to be relevant in the 21st century, you have to reconsider your practices. And I think there is this realization that this is the way forward, working with the communities you are part of, not necessarily, I mean, our project was more focused towards migrants, but obviously that's talking about everyone, whether we would consider them traditionally less engaged or not. There's a lot of people who are disengaged from mainstream culture, and there's a lot of work to do towards that. So yeah, just reconsidering that, I'm happy that I was part of this project. I learned a lot. And of course, the museum as well will have a lot of legacy related to that. There's no time probably to go into the details about that, but certainly it was a learning curve, especially with the pandemic. So we learned something that we hadn't expected. And yeah, I think that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, great points, Abir, thank you. Yeah, anybody else? Also maybe touching on what does culture mean in this, you know, like, because every pilot has done a different activity and has engaged with culture in different ways. So we have engaged with culture, produced culture, but what does culture mean? So like, you know, that's a very big question. Yeah, there's just a reflection that comes to mind. Anyone else on the legacy? And yeah, so what's your engagement with this? What's your personal favorite, you know, part of this? Because Abir has said something very nice, you know, that she's personally happy to have taken part of this because she has done some personal learning. So that's also an interesting question to ask for me. You know, what are your personal favorite parts of this?
I can answer this question because, as Abir said, even for me was a very a great opportunity to participate in so distant, incredibly close pilot, and because I learned a lot from all organizations which collaborated with us, and Yeah, let me say that one of the most brilliant thing I knew during this project is most of the participants admitted that thanks to our pilot, they visited the museum for the first time in their life. So this is a very great aspect to remark, and for us sort of but we can say that we reached one of the point we had in mind.
Thank you, Marzia. Well, we approach the end of the session. I would like to ask the same question to the others. If you could be, brief on what your favorite learning or moment or experience of this is, what you take with you.
Well, for me, probably I would say it is the sense of ownership that I feel that the groups that were involved have over the outcomes and the projects and their work. It is sort of like that's very rewarding, I would say, so that it really feels like it's their project and not our institutional project, let's say, like that. And that has been a really great experience for me personally. In terms of the legacy, this will at the picture collections of the Finnish Heritage Agency, there are plans to continue participatory work. So definitely these lessons learned and all the experiences will contribute to taking that work forward. And we have also tried in the project to also convey these lessons throughout the organization as widely as possible.
Thank you, Suvi. Davide and Francesca?
I don't know, maybe another aspect I like that many of our participants have become autonomous. They will organize future activities and projects, and someone found a job as well. So we're happy for that.
Thank you, Francesca.
Well, for the participants, I know that they have created a strong group, and I think they will continue to meet outside the CultureLabs project. Then the museum expressed their availability to offer the room for if they want to go on to meet, but the but is, if no one is leading them, motivating them to create something, what do they meet? Why should they meet within the museum? They will probably meet in the garden or somewhere else. And now our struggle is, our idea is to try to continue the collaboration with the municipality, with the museum, and to start working in a very small community, neighborhood level, to try to create not only the cohesion in the group that was in the pilot, but between the citizens living there with something very grassroots. I don't know what we will do, but for sure, CultureLabs opened the eyes for future possibilities. I cannot say now what they will be, but I know the municipality is very active, the museum is very active and very interested, and let's hope that we will have a future, either with the same participants or with the citizens. I don't know.
Thank you, Francesca. This is a great comment to close this section, to hold the process, and let's stay, what this year probably has taught us, that we should stay with the process and trust that, change is happening, and there's a lot of learning within this project, outside this project, so has, disseminated a lot of seeds, and that will continue growing. So that's very, very nice reflections to end on. If no one else from the speakers would like to add anything, I will. Yes, Abir.
Yeah. I was just checking with Elena on the chat if she's asking us to choose our favorite moments, and I chose, honestly, that the whole process was really enjoyable, although tiring and a lot of work. I really enjoyed every part of it. At some points, I wished, because I had intended to be part of all the creative processes to also express myself, but obviously it was too busy to do that. But I would recommend having that stance, like being part of the project is very useful, because especially from with the conversations. If I had to pick one thing that I really appreciated is having that democratic process, because people say it's too hard to do it. It's not. It takes time, it takes effort, but it's really rewarding, as Suvi said. At some points when I had to make decisions on my own for practical reasons, especially towards the end, with deadlines coming up, I really felt guilty. I was like, oh my God, although it's my job to make, I mean, I'm the project manager, I have to make decisions. But whenever possible, I was hoping to at least just double check that everyone's happy with that, as we were doing throughout the whole process. So yeah, democracy, cultural democracy can happen, but you might have to make the effort, but it's really rewarding and authentic. That's me.
Thank you, Abir. Okay, well, I will pass the words to Louis now as we approach our lunch break. And thanks again to everyone that participated in this very, very interesting conversation.